What makes a person small? That question, sharp as a blade left out in the cold, echoed through the corridors of my mind on the night everything cracked. Perhaps you, too, have known such a question. Perhaps someone's words or actions cut so deeply that the wound seemed to vibrate within your bones, whispering that justice could only be found by diminishing the one who inflicted it. Asterisk, how do you make the person who hurt you feel small? Asterisk, the world will offer its answers quickly, too quickly. It will tell you to retaliate, to scorch the earth beneath their feet, to wield your anger like a torch in a room soaked with oil. But we who have tasted the bitterness of these impulses know the truth. Such fire burns the hand that holds it. And so, on that night, I turned to older voices. Voices carved into time. Voices that had no interest in flattery or comfort. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, asterisk, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice. Asterisk, a strange form of vengeance, some would say, almost unsatisfying at first glance, like being told to quench a fire not by stamping it out, but by becoming air itself. But I wondered, even then, whether such a path could forge a deeper power, one that did not merely punish a person outwardly, but rendered them insignificant through the sheer immensity of our own character. For there is a truth that stalks us in the silence. Those who wound us do not become small because we strike them, but because we grow beyond the reach of their grasp. But I am getting ahead of the story. Before the growth, before the wisdom, before the calm there was pain. I imagine that you, like me, have stared at your own reflection and wondered how a single act from another human being, a betrayal, a humiliation, a dismissal, a cruelty could ripple so violently within your chest. You question not only what they did, but why it had the power to unmake parts of you, why the echo of their act lingers long after they have moved on. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned, asterisk, what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about the things, asterisk, and yet, when the wound is fresh, such teachings feel like trying to sculpt granite with bare hands. Our judgments cling to us like smoke after a fire. We cannot simply choose serenity. We cannot simply snap our fingers and become untouched by cruelty, but we can begin. And beginnings are small, fragile, and often invisible to others. I remember sitting alone, your mind may paint a similar scene, wondering whether the one who hurt me deserved consequences, humiliation, or the taste of their own cruelty. These thoughts rose like a storm tide. Even the ancient philosophers acknowledged this. Seneca wrote, asterisk, no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. Asterisk, in that moment of turmoil, I discovered something that has remained with me. Emotions do not betray Stoicism, they initiate it. It is in the confrontation with pain that we discover whether we will be mastered by it. And so the question returned. Asterisk, how do you make them feel small? Asterisk, I realized then that the question itself was a mirror showing me, not the offender, but my own raw, ungoverned interior. I felt anger coiling like smoke through the ribs, a desire for them to feel the ache they had caused. And yet something else stirred beneath it, a quieter force, a deeper force. The force that has carried humanity through storms far greater than personal betrayal. The force of As the night stretched on, I discovered a truth that all Stoic thinkers hint at, but few understand before living it. Asterisk, asterisk, you do not make the person who hurt you small by lowering them. You make them small by towering above what they awakened in you. Asterisk, asterisk, but to rise, we must first descend into the inner workshop of the soul. We must understand why their act holds power, why our pride bleeds, why our peace shatters. The Stoics believed that our primary battlefield is not the world, nor the people within it, but our own interpretations. And that realization, strange as it was, began to change everything. For I saw that the person who hurt me could only loom large if I remained small in discipline, small in self-mastery, small in vision. It was not their act that dwarfed me. It was my unexamined response to it. Realizing this was like stepping out into cold air, shocking but clarifying. The night no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a tutor. So I sat with the pain, not to justify it, not to excuse the harm, but to understand the architecture of the wound. And something inside me shifted. Not instantly, not with fanfare, but like a tide changing direction far out at sea. I remembered a line by the scholar and Hellenistic historian Pierre Haddot, asterisk, philosophy was a way of life. Asterisk, not merely words, not consolation, not abstract ideals. A asterisk, discipline asterisk, a training of the spirit, an ongoing struggle toward becoming unshakable. And so I wondered, what if the greatest way to make the person who hurt me feel small is to become someone their cruelty can no longer touch? Not through indifference, but mastery. Not through revenge, but transcendence. Not by ignoring the wound, but by elevating the one who was wounded. This is where the shadows of philosophy reveal their power, where we begin to understand that life does not ask us to destroy those who harm us. It asks us to outgrow them. And yet still, the opening question remained unsolved, as though waiting for its moment of revelation. Asterisk, how do you make the person who hurt you feel small? Asterisk, I closed my eyes that night with the question unanswered. But I felt, for the first time, that I was walking towards something, not away from someone. The path ahead was long, entwined with darkness and discipline, but ancient hands seemed to guide me forward, not to teach me how to diminish another human being, but how to rise so far above their deed that it becomes nothing more than a distant speck below. And perhaps, if you walk with me through this journey, you will discover as I did, the smallest people in your life shrink not because you push them down, but because you ascend beyond their reach. Asterisk, asterisk. May I proceed to part 2? There is a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when the pain inflicted by another ceases to be an external event and becomes an internal landscape. You may know this moment intimately. It is when the devastation stops echoing around you and begins echoing within you. No more the external blow, but the lingering resonance in the heart. And this is where our true power sleeps. Beneath the rubble of wounded pride and frustrated justice, it was in such a moment that I realized something unsettling. I had been giving more space to the one who hurt me than to myself. Their shadow stretched inside me far wider than it ever did in the real world. Their action had ended, but my rumination kept them alive. This is the paradox that Marcus Aurelius warned about when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But how often do we realize it only after we've handed that power away? And so I asked myself a question that you might now be asking too. If the person who harmed me occupies so much of my inner world, who is truly in control, them or me? The answer, uncomfortable as it was, did not flatter me, but it did free me. Because to make someone small, we must first stop enlarging them within the architecture of our thoughts. And to do that, we step into the forge, the inner workshop, where true strength is built. Not the kind of strength that roars, but the kind that refuses to collapse when the world applies pressure. In this forge, nothing escapes examination. Your anger, your disappointment, your desire for revenge, they are all placed upon the anvil. Each emotion is held to the fire, not to be annihilated but to be reshaped. Seneca said, "There is no easy way from the earth to the stars." And he was right. The climb begins in discomfort. I began to notice something. The more I observed my reaction, the smaller the offender seemed. Not because they deserved forgiveness, not yet, but because my understanding grew. And understanding, unlike anger, elevates us. It creates space inside the soul, space that cannot be touched by the smallness of another. Epictetus, who knew the taste of enslavement and humiliation, once taught his students that the world can wound the body, but only we allow the world to wound the spirit. If someone succeeds in provoking you, he said, realize that your mind is complicit. At first, I resisted this. Who wants to believe that their suffering is shared by their own cooperation? It feels unjust. It feels like betrayal of the self. But once I accepted it not as blame, but as liberation, I understood what the Stoics had been guarding all along. The power to make someone feel small lies not in the destruction of their dignity, but in the elevation of our own. Imagine for a moment a towering mountain. At its peak, the storms that rage at ground level become nothing more than white noise. A mountain does not descend to punish a traveler who throws a stone. The stone simply cannot reach its summit. This is what it means to rise, not to condone the stone, but to become unreachable by its consequences. And isn't this what we truly crave? Not their pain, but our peace. Not their fall, but our rise. Not their smallness, but our immensity. So I turned inward, deeper and deeper into the forge. I confronted my thoughts with sincerity, stripped them of dramatization, questioned every story I was telling myself, and slowly, painfully, the intensity of the injury began to fade, not because it mattered less, but because I mattered more to myself than the memory did. Pierre Hadot, interpreting the ancient Stoic exercises, once explained that philosophy is training for freedom, not political freedom. not social freedom, but freedom from the tyranny of our own automatic reactions. This is the freedom that shrinks those who hurt us not by humiliating them, but by making us immune to their influence. And yet, this inner transformation leads to a strange, almost haunting realization. When you grow, the person who harmed you begins to look different, not larger, not monstrous, but smaller, as though your empowerment casts a new shadow over them, one in which they appear not as giants of pain, but as limited beings, trapped in their own flaws, fears, and impulses. You begin to see that their actions came not from strength, but from weakness, not from superiority, but from frailty. And when you see this, not as an excuse but as a fact, you understand a principle that the Stoics mastered like few others. The powerful do not hurt others, the powerless do. And if their smallness is the cause of your wound, then enlarging your own character is the only true victory. But do not mistake this for forgiveness. Forgiveness is another chapter, another mountain, another storm. What we are discovering now is something different, something colder, sharper, deeper, a kind of dominion, a kind of sovereignty over the self. For when the soul rises, those who attempted to break it appear diminutive, not because we chose to crush them, but because they cannot rise with us. They remain where they always were, at ground level, throwing stones toward summits they can no longer reach. So I ask you now, as I once asked myself, what if your greatest act of retribution is the creation of a self so vast, so disciplined, so impenetrable, that the one who harmed you becomes irrelevant? Irrelevance is the true smallness. It is a silence louder than any insult, a shadow that does not even fall upon you because you are too high above the surface where such shadows dwell. This is the path we walk, not to shrink others through violence of emotion, but through the magnitude of our inner elevation, a magnitude achieved only through work, through discipline, through relentless self-sculpting. And so the forge burns on, but the question remains, and the answer, the real answer, still sleeps further ahead, waiting to reveal itself only when the journey is complete. How do you make the person who hurt you feel small? There comes a point in every journey inward when the air thins. You rise beyond the tangled roots of your initial hurt, beyond the crowded noise of your anger, beyond the smoke of your wounded pride. And yet, as you ascend, something unexpected begins to happen. The view changes. What once seemed catastrophic now appears as a fragment, a shard of experience, not the whole story. The mountain you are climbing reveals itself to be taller than the pain that pushed you to begin the climb. This ascent is not peaceful, not yet. It is demanding. It strips away illusions. It forces confrontation with truths that are neither gentle nor comforting. But it also reveals a new kind of strength, one that cannot exist at lower altitudes. Marcus Aurelius spoke of this when he wrote, "Look well into yourself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if you will always look. That source does not emerge from avoiding the wound, but from climbing above it." But with height comes another challenge, clarity. And clarity is not always kind. As I rose, I began to see the one who hurt me from a distance. Not physically, but spiritually. Their actions, once immense, now appeared as small movements of a small mind, driven by their own unexamined fears, weaknesses, and grievances. I saw, perhaps for the first time, that they acted not from power, but from its absence, not from dominance, but from confusion. Epictetus warned his students, when someone does wrong, remember that he does so believing that it is right. This is not a justification, it is an X-ray. It reveals a structure beneath the act, a structure built on ignorance, emotion, impulse, or pain. And when you see that structure clearly, its foundation crumbles before your eyes. The person who once towered over your peace becomes small because they are revealed as small. This realization does not dissolve the memory of what they did, nor does it demand forgiveness. It does something different. It disarms the illusion that their act was an expression of superiority. You see the fragility behind the cruelty, the limitation behind the injury, and limitations once recognized lose their power. Still, there was another layer to ascend, a harder one, a darker one. Because even as I saw their smallness, a question gnawed at me. If they are so small, why does the wound they caused feel so large? This question was a gatekeeper, standing before the final ascent, and the answer came from a place the Stoics knew well. The recognition that emotions magnify what is close, not what is great. When something touches us directly, especially when it wounds, it appears immense. But appearance is not truth, Seneca wrote. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. It is not that the harm was imaginary, but that our interpretation inflated it. Our proximity to the pain turned it into a giant, so I stepped further back within myself. I created distance. I examined the wound as though it belonged to someone else. And in that increased distance, the shape of the injury changed. The person who inflicted it seemed less like a monumental force and more like a passerby stumbling in their own blindness. And then, something profound occurred. The desire for revenge began to feel beneath me, not because I had forgiven, not because I had forgotten, but because revenge no longer aligned with who I was becoming. Revenge felt like a weight pulling me downward, back into the mud where both of us had once stood, and I had no intention of returning there. The Stoic scholar Anthony Long once wrote that Stoicism teaches us to aspire to a moral stature that transcends the injury done to us. This is the ascent. This is the transformation. You do not shrink the person who hurt you by crushing them, you do it by transcending the altitude at which they operate. But there was still the question, the same question that had haunted me from the beginning, now whispering with renewed intensity, how do you make the person who hurt you feel small? At this stage, I began to understand a deeper truth. People feel small when they confront greatness, not the greatness of status or ego, but the greatness of a person who has risen above their own suffering stands as a mirror, and that mirror reflects two things simultaneously, their inability to rise and your refusal to descend. It is this contrast that diminishes them, not through humiliation, but through comparison. Through the silent statement, you cannot control what you never built. And yet, the ascent continued. To truly rise, you must meet a moment of stillness, an internal summit where nothing external can reach you. Not their cruelty, not their words, not their remembrance. And at that summit, something extraordinary happens. You look down not at them, but at who you used to be. The version of yourself who is tangled in pain, desperate for justice, hungry for validation, and you feel something that is neither pride nor arrogance. You feel distance. Distance is the birthplace of sovereignty. It is in this distance that the one who hurt you begins to dissolve. Not into insignificance because they were never truly significant, but into perspective. They become a character in your story, not the author. They become a storm you crossed, not the climate of your life. They become a lesson, not a legacy. This is the height the Stoics dedicated their lives to. Not a detachment from the world, but a mastery within it. Not a coldness, but a clarity. And clarity always reveals the same truth. The smallness of another cannot be engineered, can only be revealed by the greatness you cultivate. When you grow, you expose their limitations. When you discipline yourself, you expose their chaos. When you rise, you expose their stagnation. The ascent itself is the answer, but the final understanding, the one that answers the question, entirely still waits in the shadows ahead. A revelation that ties the beginning of this story to its end. A truth that will not only tell you how to make the person who hurt you feel small, but why you no longer need to. We stand now on the edge of this final realization. One last step remains.